Trauma and the Soul by Donald Kalshed, the first of 5 books in this video, which saved my life and made me the man who I am today. And if you've never seen me before, 30-second disclaimer about who I am. This isn't a generic self-development channel. You won't find these books in airports or bookstores. I've spent around 13,000 to 14,000 hours reading 700 psychology books and rereading about 160 of them over the last 5 years, and this is where I talk about trauma healing, Jungian psychology, transpersonal psychology. You can check out the channel if you're interested. There's no editing. I'm not going to entertain you. I'm sharing the 5 books that made me, and interestingly, these are the 5 books that I did a little thought experiment with of I wonder what would happen if I was cursed and had to forget everything I've read. Which books would I choose that go deep, go wide, and represent the full spectrum of multi-stage self-integration that goes into my personal wounds and also reaches towards my personal ambitions and self-actualizing energy, let's call it. These are the 5 books I've chosen. They're rare. You may not have seen them before, apart from one, which is actually a second one. You've probably seen this one before. That's a great read for men. I've got an alternative for women later on. Let's just go into the books. These are the books that made me. We'll start with Trauma and the Soul by Donald Kalshed. This book is so well received by clients and students. They say it's one of the most important psychology books I've ever read, and for very good reason. It's a Jungian take on dissociation and the psycho-biological process of fragmenting and splitting your identity when you've gone through pain. It could be a difficult childhood. It could be a horrific moment in your adult life. And for me, this is the book that restored my will to live after I lost it at the age of 10 and spent 12 years not really having it. When I was 10, I went upstairs after school one day, suddenly collapsed into a existential ball of dread at the top of the stairs, and spent about 2 or 3 days in a row asking my parents questions about, is God real? What's the point of living? I don't see any reason for all this. And then began the emo stage and classic teenage rebellion, but it wasn't a superficial thing for me. My parents didn't have the answers. It's no fault of theirs. I just didn't really exist in my body, and I didn't see a reason for living at all. By reading Trauma and the Soul, I got the answers that I was looking for. I read the case studies of early childhood developmental issues. I read the stories and the therapeutic process of how to get yourself back into the body, and very interestingly, and most importantly of all, this idea that the soul has a built-in protective mechanism so that when the body is suffering lacerations and wounding, there's a special and eternal part of you which temporarily leaves to keep it safe. It's a thought experiment. It may not be the literal truth, but psychologically, if you suffer from dissociation or depersonalization, you might already get what I'm talking about. This is the book that you need to read if you want to get back into your body after something very bad happened in your past. Without a doubt, this is one of my top 5 personal books, one of the books that made me, because it gave me back the will to live in a very raw way. And it's a very academic book. It's not an accessible book, but it's a truly impactful book. Let's move on to the second one. I already previewed it. It's King, Warrior, Magician, Lover by Robert Moore and, how am I forgetting? Douglas Gillette. Awful. I've recommended this book so many times. You can see it's all crumpled up and full of highlights. I've taught it. Robert Moore, Douglas Gillette, King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. You've probably seen this book before. For my female viewers, which is about half of my audience, these are the alternatives I want you to go for. If you're not a man, then read something like Goddesses and Every Woman by Jean Shinoda Bolen, or the more recent equivalent of King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. This one here, Sage, Huntress, Lover, Queen by Mara Branscombe. This came out in 2023, and I read about 5 or 6 different feminine psychology, feminine archetype books. That entire shelf over here is all masculine, feminine psychology. This is the best one that goes the deepest and the widest in a way that's also practical in regards to shadow work. This is the equivalent of this book, but I'm going to talk about the books that made me. The reason I choose this one, if I had to forget everything that I've learned, is that as a man, I need to understand the essence of masculinity. Traditionally speaking, archetypally speaking, the healthy and unhealthy versions of the king, warrior, magician, and lover energy. This book helped me to understand my issues with addiction, my issues with ambition, my issues with rage and guilt and sorrow, and what it would mean to be a healthy king, or at least enter into princehood, intentional princehood, have a small community that I look after, what it means to give blessings, what it means to be generative, what it means to protect your people, and what it means to be a source of light and a light vessel that then amplifies out into the world in an unselfish and genuinely giving way. If you're a man who hasn't read this book, I'm not sure what you're doing this deep on self-development psychology YouTube, because you probably should have read it. And if you're a woman, please read this book. And if you're anyone, read both of them together, because then you'll understand the other half of humanity and it'll improve your relationships with family, friends, and romantic partners, or maybe even your children. King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. It's been said many times by many people why this book's great. I recommend you read it for yourself. And the next one, the third book that made me. No surprises for long-time viewers on the channel. You can guess what it's going to be. It's about somatic therapy, and in particular, it's about bioenergetics. It's Alexander Lowen and The Voice of the Body. This is a collection of lectures and essays between 1960 and 1980, give or take. Lowen is a master of working with the feelings and working with the self. Interesting side note, this book for me was my entry point into Alexander Lowen in terms of the formal reading. I've got all 12 of his books over there, and again you can see the pattern. There's a variety of archetypal psychology. I'll choose just one. There's a variety of Alexander Lowen and bioenergetics. This is all trauma. This is the one that captures the breadth and the depth. You'll learn about rage, you'll learn about things like intimate expression and disorders of intimacy. You'll also learn more about what it means to live in an emotionally intelligent way with your mind and body in harmony. This book changed the way that I understood embodiment at a fundamental level, starting with Trauma in the Soul by Donald Cowshed. I don't think I read them in this order. I think I read this one first, then Trauma in the Soul. I understood why I left my body, or why I got caught into things like screen addiction in particular, and what it would mean and what the benefits would be of actually returning to my body and enjoying this beautiful thing called human life. Get into bioenergetics, learn how to cathartically release, get rid of all of that pent-up aggression, and also to the men out there and myself, or maybe some of the women that are more emotionally repressed, learn how to cry in a way that feels strong. You don't need to weep every day of the week. You don't need to cry in front of your girlfriend or your wife. There's all this nonsense advice out there of being vulnerable for the sake of vulnerability. I want you to be courageous with your feelings, and I want you to be honest about what's going on. And you can do that privately, you can do that therapeutically with another male coach or a male therapeutic figure, you can do that with your close male friends, and if you're in a truly safe and loving relationship, you can do it with your female partner. But there's a time and a place for emotions as a man, and a book like this will help you break out of polarized, unhealthy, unconscious repression, but not swing too far into overt vulnerability and this lopsided, almost shadow warrior, weakling king energy. You'll find your middle point. You'll be able to rage when it's appropriate and never hurt someone physically, never cast abuse and violence out there in a way which would be unjust and wrong. And you'll also know how to express difficult or negative emotions and weep in a way that many men don't for many years in a row. And I likewise went through a period of multiple years in a row where I couldn't cry. For all my teenage years, my early 20s, I could not cry. Bioenergetics opened up my chest. I learned how to embody, how to stack my posture, how to align what some would say is my chakras or my energetic points, my meridians. It's all in that book. Embodiment. Currently, we've got the trauma and the soul idea of coming back down into the body. We've got the archetypes of masculinity, having a full spectrum psychological understanding. And then we've got Alexander Lowen with the voice of the body, interestingly, another somatic twisting of all these different fragments and parts. Let's move on to what I believe to be probably the most cognitively challenging book of the stack. This is for people who appreciate consciousness studies and people who appreciate, well, let's just say integral theory and integral philosophy, because no surprise, we need to have a book by Ken Wilber. We've got Ken Wilber's The Religion of Tomorrow. I'll turn it this way so that you can see it. And I'm kind of cheating with this book, because I'm going to move out the way and let you see the library. This is just the biggest, most comprehensive Ken Wilber book that I have, that I feel is the most relevant to my personal issues around spiritual craving and existential searching. All of these books over here, there's about 10 of them that are Ken Wilber. That's my integral shelf. I've got Hegel in there and spiral dynamics and Aurobindo and a variety of different integral thinkers. This one does the trick. If you're not familiar with integral theory, start with A Brief History of Tomorrow by Ken Wilber. There's a shortcut for free. If you're already familiar with integral theory, pick up this 700, 800 page behemoth, because what you're going to learn is how to practically advance your consciousness along the spiral of self-development to get what Ken Wilber would call the integral state, which means that you're more or less aligned within your central identity from a psyche, soul, and material perspective. Religion of Tomorrow is particularly tilted towards religion, as it says in the book. So if you're someone who's raised in a certain religious background, or like me, you were raised without a religious background. I was raised in an atheistic family. I had to begin my search for God and my search for my own soul on my own terms, which has its benefits and drawbacks. You'll learn how any particular religion, any particular spiritual philosophy, when it's taken to its full expression, can be a pathway towards enlightenment. I'm not personally seeking enlightenment as my main goal in life, but Ken Wilber's incredibly academic, incredibly precise way of structuring out the different quadrants of the psyche, the different aspects of humanity, and then giving you the tools and intellectual food to digest. It's so wonderful. You need to read integral theory. If you've already seen things like David Hawkins and the levels of consciousness with the emotions from shame to enlightenment, that's kind of like the elementary school version of the college version with Ken Wilber. Ken Wilber integrates, ironically, David Hawkins's work and many teachers for many different levels, but if there's 5 different books that I'd pick if I lost all of my memory, I'd go with the one that's the fattest big daddy of all the integral philosophy. I think this one's the best work. Stay with it. But also, you are going to want to go a bit deeper into Jungian therapy in particular, if you're somebody like myself, and I've struggled to try and pick one book. This is the one book that I really couldn't decide. Which single Jungian therapy book? Do I pick Carl Jung? No, definitely not. Inside my course, The Shadowwork Library, I even say openly, if you're trying to learn about Jungian psychology and Jungian philosophy, don't read Jung directly as your first entry point. I actually recommend this book, Jung's Map of the Soul by Douglas Murray. And Douglas right there, he is your guide. I'm not putting Carl Jung down. I'm just saying that in terms of an overview of the entire philosophy, this book goes into complexes, goes into the anima and animus, it goes into archetypes, it goes into a variety of wounds around creative imagination or around existential longing. A lot of existential books in this particular stack. You can tell when my wounds are. Jung's Map of the Soul is the #1 summary of Jungian psychology, and if I had to pick just one book, I'd pick this one because it does a good job at being simple but not superficial. I've recommended this book to clients, and I've seen people grasp the idea of the father complex and the mother complex, understand their primary wounds in relation to their family of origin story, and understand their romantic projections towards the unavailable anima or animus who haunts their dreams. This book unlocks the perspectives, and of course, if I could choose 10 more books to share with you, I would. We're just choosing one. Jung's Map of the Soul, please go for it. These are the 5 books I would save, but of course, the 700 books. So I decided to give myself a bit of a gift, and what would I do if I had 3 more books? So 3 bonus books hidden away at this final section of the video. These are the 3 books I'd pick if I could go a little bit further with my self-development. I would pick, firstly, a wonderful parts work-based book, which is good for autotherapeutic self-integration. I would go for Internal Family Systems Therapy, 2nd edition by Richard Swartz. If you've heard of inner child work, if you're interested in shadow work, and if you like the idea of working with your many parts, go for the 2nd edition of the book written by a therapist for therapists in training, rather than the publicly available book No Bad Parts, which is fantastic, but you might as well go for the deepest exploration into how to bring your childhood wounds, your aspirational ambitions, and a variety of different things into cohesive union. This book, I've reread all these books and typed out the notes. I think this one had about 40 to 45 pages of notes on my laptop. I've probably spent about 80 hours plus with this book. Just go for it. A bit more of an interesting esoteric read for my bonus 3 books. I'd go for this one, and long-time viewers of the channel won't be surprised by this theosophical addition into the video. It's A Treatise on White Magic by Alice Bailey, written in the 1940s or 1950s. I can't remember this particular book. Again, this is one of Alice Bailey's. That's all Alice Bailey over here. There's about 11 or 12 books on Bailey shelf of choice. High-level philosophy, high-level spiritual psychology, and this is essentially what the New Age movement could have been if it had have been smart. And that's not to put people down who are in the spiritual but not religious camp. This is just the most accurate, precise understanding of the essence of a variety of New Age ideas around reincarnation and the soul and the self-actualizing impulse of the monadic element and blah, 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 blah. It's fantastic. Honestly, this book was 50 or 60 pages of second read. I've spent probably close to 100 hours with this book. It's exceptionally good esoteric philosophy. I'm not completely sold on New Age ideas, but at the time when I was reading this book allowed me to just step out of that repetitive, shallow entertainment trance of all these spiritual experiences. And when you're listening to podcasts and people are talking about their past life regression and they're talking about their whatever, they're talking about their twin flames, I just got so bored of it. I wanted something real, something that was grounded, someone who had real knowledge that wasn't overhyped. And a lot of these books are written pre-internet. And if you're interested in how to go deeper in your studies, go pre-internet. Because if you look at the publishing industry, there's a lot of marketing behind the scenes. I'm going to have to fall into this when I start publishing books that dilute and dilute and dilute the essence of real knowledge. Because profits speak louder than truth, unfortunately, when you're a struggling author. Go for people who were working before this era and you're going to find a lot of gold. Let's go into the final book, and maybe this goes into my personal path. I'm going to go for The Living Classroom by Christopher Back. This is a transpersonal psychology take on what it means to be a esoterically inspired teacher. Christopher Back is a lecturer and incredible transpersonal psychologist, and he's talking about thought forms and collective consciousness and how to effectively transmit ideas that benefit a group. This could be used for great good or great evil. I like to imagine that when you combine it with a treatise on white magic, which sounds very occult, but actually it's just about using things like meditation and positive intellectual intuition for personal and collective gain. It's a very service-based book. You combine this with this, and for me personally, as an online teacher and a coach, look at the size of my channel at the time of recording. I read this book before starting my YouTube channel, and I structured my first 52-part video series for free as a university-style curriculum based on some of the principles in this book. And I'm likewise working on more courses and more curriculum, which really takes the beating heart of what it means to be a teacher and what it means to express deep, spiritual, cognitive, somatic truth to people in a way where they feel inspired and they get the message, they feel the message, and they hear the message and they see the message, and you're a full stack teacher. These are the books I'd go with, and I suppose I'll wrap this up with a little thing I noticed while preparing the video. If you've enjoyed this video so far, you might be interested in the rest of my channel. If you've seen me for a long time, this is going to be a little golden gift at the end. They say you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, and yet I judged these books and related them to my personal journey of self-healing over the last, 10 years or so. Something very interesting I noticed. It's a very interesting pattern. You can take the key words of the titles and you basically get a summary of Jordan's journey. So we've got Jung's map of the soul. Jung, map, soul. Voice, body. Not Sage, Huntress, Lover, Queen. I'm just going to throw it on the floor for a moment. Not that I want to disrespect the feminine, it's just not the book that I wanted. King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, and unfortunately, Goddesses in Every Woman is also going to go on the floor. Trauma and the Soul, Trauma, Soul, Living, Classroom, Internal, Family, Systems, Therapy. We'll have to go with all those words. Religion of Tomorrow, Future-Oriented, and then a treatise on white magic. You can very much see, it might be a bit messy there, but for me there's a deep sense of resonance that there's issues of spirituality, there's issues of embodiment, there's issues and themes around structuring. You've got treaty, you've got the idea of the internal family systems, the treaty, the systems, the map. I'm structuring, I'm mapping, I'm trying to find the system of truth to make sense of the pain and see a path for the future, the religion of tomorrow, the voice of the body, the living classroom. It's so interesting. It's very vital language. It's very spiritual. It's very embodied. It's very vital. And of course, there's wounding in there as well. It'd be interesting for you to pause and just look over at your bookshelf or go into your Kindle and see which 5 books you would pick, and if the 5 words or the series of words within those 5 books likewise creates a short, full circle summary of your journey so far. I reckon it might. You could leave that as a pinned comment down below, which 5 books from this library or your own library really matter to you. If you had to erase your memory, please go leave that comment. I'd love to see it. And then make the connections, and people are going to love lurking and scrolling, and I'm sure some people have already done that right now. If you enjoyed this video, you're going to love my Shadowwork library. I've got 36 of the best books that I've read in the last 4 or 5 years. You can see the link down in the description. Nothing like this exists on the internet. This is a bit of a different thing I'm doing over here. And I welcome you to join me at even greater depth so that we can upgrade our intelligence and do something useful in this life rather than scroll and do that. Also recommend sobriety and quitting these things. Books don't do everything, but it's one video. What can you do? Have a wonderful day. I'll see you in the comments.